just to continue Medicaid in our next budget cycle. Now, you may not have $6 billion that you need to find, but you've got a large amount of money for whatever your state budget is. And we're not likely to go to the federal government and say, hey guys, we'd sure like it if you'd send us a little bit more stimulus money to us. What we'd actually like to see is flexibility, the block grants, and those kind of things. But we also recognize that that's an uphill battle. But anytime we talk about flexibility, I think the thing that looms large in everybody's minds is, well, what happens with the federal Medicaid money? You know, the threat of losing federal money is something that certainly I think you could say compels states to continue participating. What about the threat of losing $29 billion in federal Medicaid money for Texas? How does that factor into any decisions that we make with respect to what we do with Medicaid? And that's, I think, a pretty enormous challenge. Medicaid isn't the only example of this. There are obviously many more, but Medicaid is so big, and it's something that all of you can identify with because of your states. But I just want to hit on a couple of other ones. Examples from the last 2 years that have come through that Texas has taken a stand on. One, of course, was the unemployment insurance stimulus money, which was to expand, it was to modernize unemployment insurance. And Texas made the calculation that those long-term costs well surpassed what that one-time money looked like. It was something like $555 million that the state of Texas could get. We would permanently have to tax our employers more to pay for this over the long run, and we were going to end up having a lot more people that were going to be claiming unemployment benefits for a longer period of time rather than helping them get back to work. And that was going to be an untenable situation for us in the future. And so we told the feds, no thanks. I think it's interesting to note that the congressman that passed that had tried unsuccessfully to get this passed through Congress without any money attached to it. But then when the stimulus money came along, he had this new opportunity to, instead of cram it down states' throats and make us do it, he got to dangle a little bit of money out there and encourage us all to go do it for that, small financial incentive. Again, Texas said no to it. Texas also rejected Race to the Top funds. We didn't apply for the funding. And a big factor in that decision was the requirement or the clear effort that the feds were pushing on the states to get us to say that we would agree to adopt Common Core curriculum standards. These are standards that would be adopted across the entire country. We have an elected state board of education. We have legislators, Representative Flynn, I see you in the back. We have legislators in our state that pass laws with respect to curriculum and education standards in Texas, and we didn't really think that it was a great idea for unelected people from other states to all get together and potentially water down what the education standards were that we would have to use in Texas. That was going to be a element of the scoring rubric for the Race to the Top application, and we decided that we did not want to do that. The other, and this is a more recent example, and you might have heard about this in recent education money that was allocated to all of the states. Texas has a special provision in it. It says, I think actually in the text of the law, something like special provisions for the state of Texas. It was unfortunately added by one of our own congressmen, which is a bit alarming. And it said that Governor Perry would have to certify to the Secretary of Education that we would not spend less on education in our next budget than we had on the last. So that is absolutely a violation of our state constitution, where our governor and legislature cannot bind future legislatures to levels of spending. We reminded our congressman that that was a violation of the state constitution, and we thought that was an important thing, that the governor uphold his oath. But we are trying to figure out how in the world the rest of the Congress thought that a little provision saying special provisions for the state of Texas was an appropriate thing. So with those three examples, you've got bribing states to expand unemployment insurance, agreeing to uniform education standards set by the entire country, and dictating state budgets. And we thought that all three of those examples were pretty insulting to the federalism, ideas of federalism. So, I think the states can say no, but we just don't say it very often. Earlier, somebody talked about the game theory of how you go about explaining to your taxpayers why we're not going after money. One of my favorite examples of this was in the CHIP, federal law for CHIP. It said something to the effect of, if a state does not take all of its CHIP allocation, we will award it to other states in the order in which they run out of their money. So the incentive being, hurry up and spend all your money, and Texas, who has not chosen to expand the CHIP program beyond the federal minimums, you'll go and get all of our money. And that certainly has been something that Texas legislators have had to really face that argument many times by their colleagues who want to use that as obvious reason that you would want to expand the program. There's one more thing I just want to kind of talk about a little bit. We talked a little bit about grants. This is just the latest thing that's kind of irritating me. There's one of these a day, and this is it for today. It's not just conditional grants and accepting strings attached. One of the things that I have found, and I don't know honestly how widespread this is, I just know that this comes across my desk every few months, where there's a grant application that some agency is going to submit. And one of the things that they often have to do is make some sort of statement of need. And you know, anybody who's written a grant application for private funding or something like this knows that what you do is tell people, we're going to need your money and we're going to use it this way for best effect. What I find really insulting is that agencies have to submit, in a lot of cases, these applications to the federal government for just a small grant program, $1 million for this or that little thing. There's some of this even in those federal health care reform grants that are out there before your states. You have to write them and say, we are in desperate shape, and we need your money, and here's how we're going to use it. And I find it a little bit insulting that the states would put something in writing, give ammunition to the federal government. That's to say nothing of accepting it with the strings attached. It's all about submitting an application to the federal government that says, we really need your money. And I think it makes it really hard for states to turn around then and say, you know what? We don't really need your strings attached, and we don't really need this money, and we need to find a better way to do this. So in closing, I guess the thing I would say is absolutely states should say no more often. And the governor talks a whole lot about the 10th Amendment and needing to restore focus on that and making sure that the federal government respects what the 10th Amendment says about the things that the states should be doing and the things that are reserved to the states. But I think that's not just a useful reminder for the federal government, but also for states, that we certainly have to exercise all of that authority and stand up and tell the federal government no when we think that there's something we can't live with. Thanks.
County prosecutors across the country are the front lines against crime. It's not the FBI, it's not the federal government, it's people that work for the county and enforcing state laws. And you, state legislators, are the front lines in the fight that we now have to reclaim and to preserve the republic that we have in the United States, that you heard from my friend Ted Cruz about at the beginning of the last session. Well, if you are prepared to stand up and exert the constitutional powers that the Constitution has left you and the Supreme Court has not said you don't have yet. So in my 10 minutes, what I want to talk about is what the Constitution says about state power and what the Constitution says in the 10th Amendment, and then talk a little bit about how you can use one of the weapons that's in the Constitution and how you should use that weapon. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the 10th Amendment. It says the power is not delegated by the Constitution to the United States, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. You've heard a lot about the 10th Amendment, I'm sure. You've read it, I'm sure you've read it yourself. You'll hear a lot about it here. But the problem with the 10th Amendment is that it basically pivots on what are the powers that are delegated by this Constitution to the United States. Because what it essentially says is the states have the powers that are left over after the delegation of powers that are in the United States Constitution. So what it's doing, it's pointing in the direction of the rest of the Constitution, in particular Article 1, but there are other powers in the Constitution, like in the 14th Amendment, that specifically empower the United States to act. So all the action in the courts, and really all the analytic action when it comes to what are the reserved powers of the states, really turn over and look at what are the delegated powers of the United States. That's how the courts look at it, and that's how you have to look at it. So there aren't any like free-floating state powers. They're the powers that are left over after you look at the delegation. And the problem that we have in this country is that for a very long period of time, that enumerated powers scheme, that list of powers, has been expanded and expanded and expanded. Not, of course, in the text, although in a couple instances it was in the text, but mostly in the courts. First, Congress pushes for the power, and then because their push is popular, the courts bend over and they give them that power. They don't like resisting popular opposition. The courts don't. So you may think they do, but they actually don't. So that's the problem. Now, the powers that Congress exercise over the people and then over the states as well fall into two categories. They are the spending power, which there actually isn't this express spending power. There's the taxing power, which then the tax money can